Hi friends, my name is host Eric, and as you may know, I am currently working on this Defensible Typology class, and periodically as I have various thoughts, I'll put together notes. Notes, as they say. Here's the problem. The output gain on the compressor is too high. Put it about there. Now, if I move this closer, we should be just fine. Hi, I'm host Eric. And anyway, this is some notes I made on Metaframe. I wanted to go over them. This is sort of a medical, psychological, healthy, unhealthy framework, and the way that people talk about it. And note, this is just a kind of descriptive overview of how people approach these questions. It's not making any particular case here. So when we talk about things as being non-toxic or healthy, we're talking about them being either non-reactive biologically or non-reactive ontologically, if they're simply neutral. So if I touch this is non-reactive biologically. Now if this were covered with molten lava, that would be reactive biologically, right? So that'd be toxic in some way. Now, in fact, that would be injurious because it would be heat causing the problem, not toxicity per se. But if this were covered in, say, liquid mercury, then it would be a toxicity issue, okay? It would be reactive biologically. It would not interact well with my biological being. Now, the same thing is true of things that are healthy if they're non-reactive ontologically. So what that means is, if I don't say anything really to disagree with you or otherwise shit on you, I'm being non-reactive ontologically. If you say, make a joke that isn't really funny, you're being, in some regard, corrosive ontologically as we move down to the thing. Although in a super mild way. It's way excessive to use that kind of language. But then I can choose to be non-reactive ontologically, which is to either courtesy laugh or just not really comment upon it, change the subject or whatever. That'd be a way of being non-reactive. But also, that would be, if I change the subject and stuff, then we're moving into optimizing ontologically. So I'm saying, okay, let's work together to be ontologically friendly to one another and help each other have good self-concept and whatever. Optimizing biologically is, in some weird way, a more controversial subject. There are a lot of people who think you can optimize biologically by diet, and for some body types that's probably true. You can certainly optimize biologically by exercise, that's to say, gain a greater ability to run a long distance before getting tired, that kind of thing. But those also have sort of long-term negative impacts on your biological optimality because you're putting greater pressure on your existing biology, which is going to affect its durability long-term. Optimizing ontologically is actually the more controversial of the things. A lot of people see cognitive functions as a means of ontologically optimizing, and that can be understood in a couple of different ways. People can understand it as, I understand my own attentional habits better, the extent to which I lack meaningful free will and I'm simply a reflex being allows me to be less reflexive and have more free will. There's that kind of perspective, which is basically the perspective I have on it, where that it's informative about the world, people, and myself. I understand everything better because I have the correct framework. So that's one way of looking at it. Excuse me. As far as optimizing ontologically in the other sense, there are people who view the labels of personality type, for example, as aspirational, basically. That they'd like to be creative, logical, smart. Well, they have all these various qualities that are associated with this type description, and so they take on that label and attempt to live up to those standards. And that's another approach to it. And from my perspective, and for a lot of good reasons, there is to think that it's the correct perspective on this, is that's the wrong way to go with this, because this isn't that kind of thing. It doesn't work like that. And it assumes its own frame that's subsumed by this frame. Now let's look at toxicity. So, fundamentally, toxicity falls into two categories. The receipt of toxicity, being the object of something toxic, and the perpetration of toxicity. And I'm going to talk first about reactive biology, which is obviously if you touch something like liquid mercury, or something that's a poisonous heavy metal or a radioactive isotope, or get it in your body or something, that's going to have a negative reactivity to you toxically. That's what we consider like toxic. If you swallow some solvent or poison that's not good for you, that's going to be toxic, right? So that one we all kind of understand and agree upon, respond just intuitively, right? The perpetration of such then would be to shoot chemical weapons at somebody or whatever. Reactive ontologically is a much more complicated matter. So if I'm the recipient of ontological toxicity, then what that means is somebody's attacking my identity in ways that are toxic to me and my existing ontological strategies. Anyway, but it doesn't necessarily make the behavior itself toxic, right? Like, cleaning your floor with bleach is toxic to the various little organisms down there, but that doesn't make it a bad behavior. So sometimes what the person receives as toxicity is not an actually objectively toxic behavior. Perpetrating toxicity, then, is something that usually correlates with wrongdoing on the part of the perpetrator, but not always, because how you view the toxicity, whether it's good, necessary cleansing toxicity or ontology harming toxicity, depends on a lot of different contexts, right? So, for example, if I call somebody out on their bad behavior, it's toxic to their existing ego and their existing construction of self, but that doesn't make it toxic behavior. On the other hand, if somebody tells a bunch of lies about me to try to create doubt in other people's minds about my veracity or transparency or authenticity of the person, that kind of toxic behavior is objectively bad. So these are the kind of things in which we end up getting and having more complicated discussions, let's put it that way. Things that are corrosive biologically or corrosive ontologically, in that case what we're saying is the behavior itself is inherently toxic and doesn't link to a bunch of specifics. So if I'm trying to leverage you as a stratagem, I like to put you in places where I make things zero sum so that you have to lose and I get to win consistently in a normal relationship. That's corrosive ontologically. Things that are corrosive biologically, those things tend to be non-reactive in the moment, but over time break down the body. So you might say that cigarettes are both reactive biologically. In the moment they give you a little bit of a rush, and they're corrosive biologically, and they're toxic. Okay, so that's biology we're talking about, and ontology, which is links to the personality. But if we talk specifically about personality, okay, well, what is this ontology we keep talking about in this top part? We know that the following elements are included when people talk about ontologies, identities, personalities, or whatever. Namely, their experience, and it's most relatable when it's biological. So if I'm screaming because my foot's just been broken, everybody's very sympathetic because it's easy for everybody to relate because everybody's experienced it on that biological concrete level. And that's true of most illnesses and injuries. It's also easy for people to relate when we're talking about something like capacity. Well, I can't reach that is a perfectly good excuse, right? For whatever you can't reach. I mean, somebody might say, well, pull a chair over and stand up on it. But then you get into the thing, well, I'm actually don't have very good balance. I'm afraid I'm going to fall over and hurt myself. And everyone goes, okay, you know what? Never mind. I'm not going to question your capacity. And then there's also the experience of exercise, or what one might call your physical mood. It's true that you have physical mood that links, at least on the physical plane, to amount of moving around you do. If I'm just sitting here, I'm usually not out of breath. If I'm really hammering through a piece of information or a document like this, you can see that I am actually getting a little short of breath at sometimes. But if I were to be outside running a marathon, I'd be very short of breath. And then there's the other half of personality, which is a controversial half of personality, where people have arguments about whether there's anything concrete or real there to talk about. And that includes what we've always historically called things like spirit, soul. Possession is linked to that as well. The idea that an entity exists outside of a biology is itself a concept of an ontology that's distinct from the biological body. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean such a thing exists, but it means that it exists as a distinct category that people know and understand to be true, regardless of anything else. And then, of course, this issue of identity. So what makes up personality, then, falls under, in at least in terms of its relevance, if one wishes to argue under this frame, the frame of medicality, or pathologization. The questions of personality are fundamentally ones of what's non-reactive personality-wise, what's optimizing personality-wise, what's reactive personality-wise, and what's corrosive personality-wise. So just something I thought I'd probably include in the metaframing and link it back to a variety of different other things. I need slides and stuff like that. But I'm slowly working on this project that I'd keep myself interested in it by sharing with you my project as I finish little bits. Thanks for watching. And this is also going to link to this upcoming video about Dr. Ramani, where I'm basically going to critique. I like her. I think she's smart. I like what she's doing. I like what she's saying. I agree with her almost across generally. But I also see how she's telling part of the story because she doesn't have cognitive functions of the metaframe that allows her to draw these kind of distinctions that I'm making here. And my point in that video is going to be partially that she's not including things that are optimizing ontologically as healthy or non-toxic, only including things that are non-reactive ontologically. So anyway, that's where this all came from, and that's what I'm putting up right now, and I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.